I am Arthur. I am 30 years old. 5 years ago, my parents threw me out of my childhood home like a bag of garbage. They looked me dead in the eye and told me I was nothing but a waste of space. While I was frantically packing my entire life into a single, beat-up duffel bag, terrified of the fast-approaching winter and having absolutely no idea where I was going to sleep that night, my parents were sitting in our formal dining room. They were uncorking a bottle of expensive vintage champagne. They had just drained their life savings, tapped heavily into their retirement accounts, and handed my 23-year-old brother, Julian, a cashier's check for $1 million to start his so-called dream business. My father looked at me standing by the front door with my meager belongings. He laughed, a short, sharp sound that I will never forget, and said, "You don't build a life on scraps, son. Maybe if you were a visionary like your brother, you wouldn't be leaving here empty-handed." They humiliated me. They discarded me without a second thought, treating my homelessness as a necessary sacrifice to fund the golden child's ridiculous fantasy. They laughed at me in front of my own sibling. But there is one thing they didn't know. They didn't know that my silent exit from that house wasn't a retreat. It was the absolute beginning of an empire. They didn't know about the brilliant corporate lawyer I would eventually hire, or the ironclad legal traps I was quietly setting while they were busy burning through their cash to look wealthy on the internet. And right now, as they stand crying and begging outside my security gates, they are finally realizing that the very foundation of their lives has been legally dismantled by the son they threw away. Before I tell you exactly how I took everything from them without breaking a single law, hit the like button if you believe that karma always comes to collect its debts. And please, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. It helps me realize I am not alone in this journey. Now, let's go back to where the karma finally caught up to them. I was standing barefoot on the mahogany balcony of my beachfront villa. It was a Tuesday morning, right around 9 o'clock. The air was crisp, tasting of sea salt, morning dew, and absolute freedom. I had a heavy ceramic mug of black coffee in my hand. The ocean was putting on a show, the waves crashing against the shoreline in a steady, calming rhythm that always helped me think. Down below my balcony, the private coastal road was usually dead quiet this time of day. It was a gated community, occupied only by early joggers, landscapers, or the occasional delivery truck. I had bought this property a year ago. It was my sanctuary. It was the physical manifestation of every single sleepless night, every drop of sweat, and every ounce of humiliation I had swallowed over the last 5 years. Then, a very familiar, aggressive engine roar shattered the morning peace. A sleek, black Porsche Macan swerved erratically around the bend of the coastal road. It took the corner way too fast, the tires squealing against the asphalt. I recognized the vehicle instantly. I didn't even need to verify the license plate, though I already knew it by heart. I had paid for a top-tier private investigator who dug up every single financial record, lien, and asset tied to that exact car. The Porsche slammed its brakes right outside my wrought iron security gates, skidding slightly before coming to a violent halt. The driver's side door flung open. Out stumbled my younger brother, Julian. He looked absolutely nothing like the polished, arrogant, self-proclaimed CEO he pretended to be on his social media accounts. The facade had completely melted away. His expensive designer shirt was untucked and wrinkled, as if he had slept in it for 3 days straight. His hair, usually styled to perfection, was a messy, greasy nest. His face was red, bloated, and streaked with moisture. He looked incredibly small. The passenger door opened a split second later. My mother, Eleanor, hurried out onto the pavement. She looked entirely out of place in this neighborhood. She was wearing a faded cardigan, her face pale and drawn, her hands frantically reaching out to grab Julian's arm to steady him. She was pleading with him, her voice a frantic, high-pitched murmur that carried up to my balcony on the sea breeze. She was terrified of the neighbors seeing them. She was terrified of the reality they were currently living in. Julian roughly yanked his arm away from her grip. He stumbled forward, grabbing the thick iron bars of my security gate with both hands. He stared through the bars, his eyes traveling frantically up the manicured driveway. He looked at the custom water fountain bubbling peacefully in the courtyard. He looked at the massive stone pillars of my home. He looked at the floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the ocean. And then, his gaze finally traveled upward and locked onto me, standing high up on the balcony, looking down at him. For a long, heavy second, the world just stopped spinning. The ocean seemed to go quiet. He looked at me. He looked at the older brother he had discarded. The brother he had constantly mocked at family gatherings. The brother he had actively tried to destroy to save his own skin. And then Julian just broke. His legs gave out. He fell to his knees right there on the hot asphalt of the street, his hands sliding down the iron bars. He slammed his fists against the pavement, completely ignoring my mother as she tried to pull him up by his shoulders, begging him to stop making a scene. Julian didn't care about the scene anymore. He threw his head back toward the sky and screamed at the top of his lungs. His voice cracked with pure, unfiltered, agonizing jealousy. Why does he get everything? Mom, tell me. It was supposed to be me. It was supposed to be my life. Why him? I did not flinch. I did not smile. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, feeling the warm liquid slide down my throat. The coffee tasted exceptionally good that morning. I watched them unravel on the street, the architects of my deepest pain, finally crushed under the weight of their own arrogance. To understand how my golden child brother ended up weeping on the pavement outside my mansion, you have to understand the sheer magnitude of the betrayal that started it all. You have to understand what it feels like to be erased from your own family. It was a Tuesday afternoon 5 years ago. I was 25 years old. At the time, I was working a grueling, dead-end logistics job, loading delivery trucks and managing inventory at a dusty facility on the edge of town. I was trying to figure out my next move in life. I had always been the quiet one in the family, the reliable one, the one who stayed out of trouble, the one who tried to fix the broken Wi-Fi router, the one who mowed the lawn on weekends just to get a single, fleeting nod of approval from my father. Julian, on the other hand, was the undisputed golden boy. He had dropped out of 2 different expensive colleges, complaining that the professors didn't understand his vision. He had wrecked 3 cars before his 22nd birthday, and each time my father simply bought him a new one. Julian had never held a real job for more than a month. But to my parents, he was a misunderstood genius. A brilliant entrepreneur just waiting for the universe to hand him his big break. I walked into our house after a brutal 10-hour shift. My boots were heavy with warehouse dirt, my back ached, and I just wanted a hot shower. But the moment I stepped into the foyer, I realized the house was buzzing with an unnatural, electric excitement. My mother, Eleanor, was wearing her favorite pearl necklace. It was the necklace she usually saved for important events, like Thanksgiving dinners, funerals of wealthy relatives, or high-stakes HOA meetings. My father, Richard, was standing tall by the living room fireplace. He was holding a piece of paper in his hands like it was the Holy Grail. Julian was sprawled comfortably on the expensive leather sofa, scrolling on his phone with a massive, smug grin plastered across his face. "Arthur, go pack your things," my dad said. He didn't even look up at me when he spoke. He just delivered the life-shattering sentence like he was commenting on the evening weather. I froze in the doorway, my heavy work jacket halfway off my shoulders. "What? Pack my things for what? You're 25 years old," my mother chimed in. Her voice was dripping with that fake, sugary concern she always weaponized when she was about to do something unspeakably cruel. "It's time you learn some real adult responsibility. You're just wasting space here, Arthur. We need your bedroom. Julian needs a dedicated home office for his new venture." "A home office?" I asked, completely bewildered, my brain struggling to process the words. "Mom, he doesn't even have a job. What venture?" Julian finally looked up from his screen, his smirk widening into a full, arrogant smile. "I'm starting a luxury lifestyle brand, bro high-end apparel, exclusive curated events, imported fragrances. Dad and Mom are my angel investors. We are taking this to the moon." My father proudly held up the piece of paper he had been clutching. It was a certified cashier's check. $1 million, my dad announced, puffing out his chest with immense pride. I cashed out a huge chunk of my 401k. We remortgaged the house. I even dipped into the inheritance your grandfather left behind. We are putting our money behind real, tangible potential. Julian is going to put this family's name on the map. You, Arthur, on the other hand, just drag your feet. You work at a warehouse. You lack ambition. It's time for you to leave this house and figure it out on your own. I stood there, the air completely knocked out of my lungs. The room started to spin. I didn't ask for a piece of that $1 million. I never wanted their money. I just wanted a roof over my head while I saved up enough of my meager salary to afford a decent apartment deposit. I had maybe $400 to my name in my checking account. Rents in our city were astronomical. I have nowhere to go, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Can I just have until the end of the month? Just 2 weeks to find a roommate? Absolutely not, my dad said sharply, his tone turning instantly cold. Tough love builds character. I want your house key on the kitchen counter in 10 minutes. I walked up the stairs in a daze. I packed my life into a single duffel bag. 5 pairs of jeans, some shirts, my old laptop, and a heavy winter coat. As I walked heavily back down the stairs and out the front door, I could hear the distinct pop of a champagne cork coming from the kitchen. They didn't even walk me to the door. They didn't say goodbye. They were celebrating their new millionaire son while their eldest walked out into the freezing wind. That night, I parked my old, coughing Honda Civic in the far, unlit corner of a 24-hour Walmart parking lot. I reclined the driver's seat as far back as the broken lever would allow. I pulled my winter coat entirely over my chest and face, and I stared at the stained fabric of the car roof. The bitter cold seeped rapidly through the thin windows, chilling me to the absolute bone. Every time a car drove past, the bright headlights would sweep across my face, reminding me how exposed, how incredibly vulnerable, and how utterly alone I was. I waited for the tears to come, but they didn't. Crying was a luxury for people who had a warm bed to retreat to. Instead, a cold, hard, unbreakable knot formed deep in my chest. I made a silent vow to the dark roof of that car. I promised myself that I would never, ever be at the mercy of another human being again. For the next 8 months, my life was a grueling, miserable cycle of pure survival. I bought a cheap membership to a 24-hour gym just so I could use their showers at 4 in the morning. I lived off jars of generic peanut butter, stale bread, and the dollar menu at fast food drive-thrus. I kept my warehouse job, taking on brutal, back-breaking night shifts. I loaded heavy wooden crates into freight trucks until my hands were covered in cracked calluses and my lower back screamed in constant agony. But I didn't just survive in that darkness. I evolved. One of the older guys at the warehouse, a giant, quiet man named Ben, figured out pretty quickly that I was sleeping in my car. He didn't offer me useless pity or empty words. He offered me the gravel driveway behind his modest house so the local cops wouldn't harass me in the middle of the night. He ran a heavy-duty orange extension cord out his kitchen window so I could charge my cheap, second-hand laptop inside my car. During the day, while the rest of the world worked normal jobs or slept in comfortable beds, I sat in the cramped driver's seat of my Honda and taught myself how to code. I devoured free online courses. I learned complex database management, cloud infrastructure deployment, and enterprise software architecture. I was hungry, both literally starving and metaphorically ravenous, and that profound hunger made my mind incredibly sharp. Slowly, the freelance gigs started trickling in. A local auto parts store needed a custom inventory management system. I built it for a fraction of what a big agency would charge. They loved it so much they recommended it to a regional hardware chain. Suddenly, the money started moving. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building a foundation. I finally rented a tiny, barren studio apartment. I bought a real mattress. I registered my LLC. I hired my first employee, a brilliant, no-nonsense programmer named Sarah who believed entirely in my vision. We incorporated the business properly. We hustled like our lives depended on it because mine literally had. Meanwhile, through the grapevine of social media and extended family, I would occasionally catch glimpses of my family's glorious success. Julian's luxury lifestyle brand was heavily pushed on local Instagram pages. I saw highly produced videos of him driving that brand new Porsche Macan, wearing tailored Italian suits that cost more than my entire car. He threw lavish launch parties at downtown hotels with open bars, inviting minor local celebrities and influencers. Aunt Clara, the designated family gossip and meddler, would occasionally call me just to rub salt in the wound. "Julian is doing so phenomenally well, Arthur," she would purr through the phone, the condescension practically dripping from the receiver. "He's looking at prime commercial real estate in the financial district. Are you still working at that dusty warehouse moving boxes? You know, if you just swallowed your pride and apologized to your father, maybe Julian would be generous enough to hire you to sweep the floors of his new boutique." I never got angry. I never raised my voice. I just politely agreed, wished her a good day, hung up the phone, and went right back to writing code. I knew the basic math of business. I knew what prime commercial leases actually cost. I knew what open bar parties cost. Julian wasn't generating revenue. He was literally setting my parents' retirement fund on fire just to look successful on the internet. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that eventually the smoke would clear, the money would dry up, and the ashes would fall. I just didn't realize that when the financial fire finally reached their doorstep, they would actively try to throw me into the flames to save themselves. The real storm hit during my third year of running the business. My software company had just landed a massive, multi-year, exclusive contract with a national logistics firm. My personal salary jumped from scraping by to serious, undeniable wealth almost overnight. Sarah and I moved our operation into a sleek, glass-walled downtown office. I traded my dying Honda for a quiet, reliable luxury sedan. I didn't flash my money on social media. I didn't buy designer clothes. I quietly and aggressively invested it into diverse portfolios and real estate. That November, for the first time in 3 long years, I received a formal written invitation to Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house. I knew exactly why the invitation arrived. Aunt Clara had undoubtedly caught wind of my new downtown office space and reported back to the mothership. I decided to go, not out of a sense of family loyalty or love or forgiveness. I went out of a dark, morbid curiosity to see the exact state of their crumbling empire. When I walked through the front door, the atmosphere inside the house was suffocating. The furniture looked exactly the same, but the energy in the room was frantic, heavy, and desperate. Julian looked exhausted. The dark circles under his eyes were poorly hidden by expensive, brand-name skincare products. His usual arrogant swagger was replaced by a nervous, twitchy energy. My dad's posture had completely lost its usual rigid, commanding arrogance. My mother rushed to the door to hug me, a gesture so forced and unnatural it made my skin physically crawl. We eventually sat down at the large dining table. The expensive turkey sat in the center, practically untouched, as the inevitable conversation finally started. "So, Arthur," my dad began. He cleared his throat loudly and forced a tight, uncomfortable smile. "Clara tells us your little computer project is actually taking off. A downtown office. Very impressive for someone with your background." "It's doing well," I said evenly, taking a slow sip of my ice water. I kept my face completely blank. "That's the true spirit of this family," my dad continued, leaning heavily on the mahogany table, trying to project authority. "Success, ambition, winning, which is exactly why we need to talk about Julian's business. He's going through a bit of a temporary cash flow hiccup. He expanded too fast, you know how it is in the luxury market. The economy is tough right now. We need you to step up to the plate and provide a bridge loan. Just $200,000 to keep the momentum going through the holiday season." I slowly placed my water glass down on the coaster. I looked around the table. Julian was staring intently at his plate, refusing to make eye contact with me. My mother was gripping her linen napkin like it was a life preserver on a sinking ship. A bridge loan? I asked softly, letting the silence stretch out. You want me to personally fund Julian's failing company? It's an investment in family, my dad corrected quickly, his voice rising in volume. We gave you life, Arthur. We raised you. We put food on your plate for 2 decades. It's time you paid us back for that investment and helped your brother when he needs it. It's what real families do. I looked my father dead in the eye. I didn't blink. You gave him $1 million in cash. You gave me 10 minutes to pack a duffel bag and threw me out into the winter. The answer is no. Not a single dime. My father's face turned a violent shade of crimson. He slammed his heavy fist down on the table, rattling the expensive silverware and knocking over a wine glass. You ungrateful little brat. We pushed you out of this house so you would succeed. You owe your entire company, your entire life, to our tough love. If we hadn't kicked you out, you'd still be a lazy warehouse worker. I stood up slowly. I picked up my napkin, tossed it casually onto my half-eaten plate, and walked out the front door without saying another word. The silence behind me was absolutely deafening. I thought that establishing that hard, physical boundary would be the end of it. I genuinely thought they would realize I was no longer the scared, desperate kid they could push around and manipulate. I was wrong. 3 days later, I was sitting in my glass-walled office, reviewing an expansion proposal for the European market, when my phone buzzed violently on the desk. It was an urgent, automated high-priority alert from my primary business bank. Transaction alert. $50,000 outgoing wire transfer initiated. Status. Pending verification. My blood ran completely cold. I dropped my pen. My company had incredibly tight, multi-tiered financial controls. Neither Sarah nor I had authorized a wire transfer of that magnitude that morning. I immediately grabbed my phone, bypassed the standard customer service line, and called the bank branch directly. I demanded to speak to David, the senior branch manager who handled all my corporate accounts. David, what the hell is this $50,000 transfer? I demanded, pulling up my administrative dashboard on my dual monitors. I didn't authorize this wire. Kill the transaction immediately. Arthur, hold on, calm down. I'm looking at the back-end logs right now, David said. I could hear his keyboard clacking rapidly in the background. A heavy, sickening pause followed. Arthur, the request didn't come from your secure corporate portal. It originated from an old linked retail account, a joint family checking account that was opened when you were 18 years old. Your father, Richard, is still officially listed as a joint custodian on that legacy profile. He used the legacy verification protocols to initiate an internal sweep from your linked corporate master account, pushing the funds out to a third-party account registered under the name Julian Enterprises. I gripped the edge of my heavy oak desk so hard my knuckles turned completely white. A roaring, rushing sound filled my ears. They didn't just aggressively ask for my money. When I looked them in the eye and said no, my own father used an ancient, forgotten banking loophole from my childhood to break into my livelihood and steal 50 grand to feed his golden child's failing vanity project. He treated my corporate accounts like his own personal piggy bank. Freeze it, I ordered. My voice dropped to a terrifyingly calm, dead register. Freeze every single account tied to my social security number. Block the transfer. Flag Richard's profile for unauthorized access and internal fraud. Arthur, listen to me. If I execute a hard freeze based on fraud, it locks down their access entirely. It automatically triggers an internal federal fraud investigation by the bank's security division, David warned, his voice tight with concern. Do it, David. Cut the head off the snake. 10 minutes later, my personal cell phone started ringing. It was my dad. I let it ring. Then my mom called. Then Julian. Dozens of calls pouring in over the next hour. I ignored every single one of them. I sat in my quiet office and let the harsh, brutal reality of their betrayal wash over me. The absolute, staggering entitlement. The sheer lack of basic human respect for my hard work, my employees, and my life. They viewed me as nothing more than an ATM they could smash open whenever they needed cash. The next morning, an email hit my corporate inbox. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It was a formal, aggressive, multi-page demand letter from a man named Lawyer Miller, representing my parents. I opened the PDF and read it twice just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating the sheer audacity of the words. The lawyer claimed that because my business was established shortly after I lived at my parents' home, and because family resources, meaning the basic food I ate as a dependent teenager, contributed to my overall upbringing and education, my parents were legally entitled to an equitable share of my corporate assets. Furthermore, they demanded the immediate restoration of their banking access, claiming my security freeze was an illegal lockout of joint family funds and threatened a massive lawsuit for financial damages. It was a blatant bullying tactic, a baseless, legally frivolous lawsuit threat designed purely to scare me into unfreezing the accounts and surrendering the money out of fear. They thought because I was the quiet kid, the one who always avoided conflict, I would immediately fold under the intense pressure of complex legal jargon printed on official law firm letterhead. I printed the demand letter out. I walked over to the heavy-duty industrial shredder in the corner of my office, fed the document directly into the steel blades, and watched their empty threats turn into useless confetti. I didn't reply to the email. I didn't call them back. I didn't yell or scream. I just went back to my desk, opened a new encrypted digital file, and began meticulously planning. If they wanted a brutal war over money, control, and assets, I was going to give them a masterclass in total financial destruction. But my first major piece of ammunition in this war came from a source I never, ever expected. For 2 agonizingly slow weeks, the silence from my end was absolute. I strictly instructed my own legal team to completely ignore Lawyer Miller's hollow, aggressive threats. I knew exactly how these legal shakedowns worked. To actually file a civil lawsuit of that magnitude and complexity, my parents would need to pay a massive, upfront cash retainer to their attorney, which I knew for a definitive fact they did not have. Their liquidity was entirely drained by Julian's failures. They were bluffing with an empty hand, praying I would crack under the psychological pressure. I didn't even flinch. Instead of worrying about their phantom lawsuit, I focused entirely and aggressively on scaling my company's operations. We were in the final stages of negotiating the purchase of a mid-sized commercial server farm to host our new enterprise clients. More importantly, I was rapidly learning the intricate, highly guarded world of commercial real estate and asset protection. I was moving massive amounts of corporate capital, legally and systematically shielding every single dollar behind complex corporate LLCs, blind trusts, and holding companies that my parents couldn't touch even if they somehow hired the best corporate litigators in the country. I was building an impenetrable fortress. Then, on a rainy, miserable Thursday night, at exactly 11:45 p.m., my personal cell phone rang. The glowing caller ID displayed an unknown local number. Usually, at that hour, I would let it go straight to voicemail without a second thought. But something deep in my gut, an instinct honed from months of sleeping with one eye open in a Walmart parking lot, told me I needed to pick it up. "Hello," I answered, keeping my voice low and steady in the quiet darkness of my apartment. "Arthur? Is this Arthur?" A woman's voice whispered frantically on the other end of the line. She sounded completely out of breath, her voice shaking with undeniable terror. "Yes, speaking. Who is this?" "My name is Chloe," she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. I used to be Julian's executive assistant at his lifestyle company. I quit 3 days ago. I walked out. I shouldn't be calling you, I know I shouldn't, but I haven't slept in 2 days. You need to look into his commercial leases immediately. You need to look into a man named Marcus. I sat up straight in my bed, the lingering sleep instantly vanishing from my brain, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. "Slow down, Chloe. Take a breath. Who the hell is Marcus?" "He's a shady private investor Julian brought in a few months ago when the family money finally ran out," Chloe explained, her voice trembling so hard I could hear the phone rattling against her cheek. "Julian's business has been functionally bankrupt for over a year. It's a total facade. He hasn't paid his primary vendors in 6 months. But last month, Marcus helped Julian secure a massive commercial loan from a regional bank to cover his immediate debts and keep up the wealthy appearances on social media. It was for $200,000. Chloe, that makes absolutely no sense, I said, a sickening, heavy feeling already rising rapidly in my stomach. How does a functionally bankrupt 23-year-old with a trail of unpaid vendors secure a $200,000 commercial bank loan? No underwriter would ever approve that. Because he didn't do it alone, Arthur, Chloe said, dropping the absolute bombshell that would change the trajectory of our lives forever. He used your name. I saw the finalized paperwork sitting on his desk before I quit. He used your corporate credentials, your company's highly confidential financial summaries, and he forged your signature as the primary guarantor on the massive loan. Marcus provided the fake notary stamps to make it look official. Julian told the loan officers that your highly successful software company was formally backing his venture as a corporate sponsor. My blood literally stopped moving in my veins. The air in my bedroom suddenly felt freezing cold. This wasn't petty family drama anymore. This wasn't an argument over Thanksgiving turkey. This wasn't even a greedy dad trying to swipe 50 grand through a banking loophole. This was a major federal crime. This was felony wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and commercial bank fraud. Chloe, I said, my voice dropping to an eerily calm, detached whisper. Are you willing to swear to this on the record? I took pictures of the physical documents, she whispered back, sounding close to tears. I'm sending them to your secure email address right now. I don't want to go to federal prison, Arthur. I had absolutely nothing to do with it. I just organized the files. Please, God, don't let them drag me down with them. You did the exact right thing by calling me, I told her, my tone shifting to firm reassurance. I'll protect you. Keep your head down. Don't answer any calls from Julian, and wait for my lawyer to contact you. I hung up the phone. A sharp notification pinged loudly from my laptop sitting on the desk across the room. I threw off the covers, walked over, and opened the email from Chloe. There they were. High-resolution, undeniable photos of a commercial loan agreement from a well-known mid-tier regional bank. And right there on the bottom line of the guarantor page, right next to Julian's messy, arrogant scrawl, was a flawless, meticulously traced forgery of my signature, officially backed by my company's stolen federal tax ID numbers. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I walked into the kitchen, brewed a strong pot of black coffee, sat at my granite kitchen island, and stared at the glowing screen for hours. For a brief, fleeting second, the ghost of the little boy I used to be, the boy who just wanted his father's approval, the boy who just wanted his family's love, whispered quietly in my ear. If you report this to the authorities, you will destroy him. He will go to jail. You will utterly destroy your parents' lives. This is the absolute point of no return. But then, the ghost of the 25-year-old man shivering violently in a Walmart parking lot stepped forward and crushed that weak sentiment into absolute dust. They threw you away. They tried to steal your hard-earned money. And now, they are illegally trying to chain you to their sinking ship to save themselves. At exactly 7 a.m. the next morning, I was sitting perfectly still in the polished oak conference room of my lead corporate attorney. His name was Sterling, a ruthless, brilliant ex-federal prosecutor who now handled high-stakes corporate litigation. I slid the printed photos of the forged loan documents across the expansive table. Sterling adjusted his expensive glasses. He reviewed the documents in absolute silence for 3 long minutes. He cross-referenced the tax IDs, examined the notary stamps, and traced the forged signature with the end of his expensive pen. Finally, he looked up at me, his expression deadly serious. Arthur, Sterling said, his voice grave and measured, if we hand this over to the authorities, the bank will immediately call in the entire loan. When Julian defaults, the federal investigators will tear his life apart. They will seize his assets. Your parents, if their names are tied to any of his business accounts or if they acted as secondary co-signers, will likely lose absolutely everything in the resulting financial fallout. They could face conspiracy charges. Are you fully, entirely prepared for the magnitude of that destruction. I turned my head and looked out the massive floor-to-ceiling window at the bustling city below. I watched the tiny cars moving like ants. I thought about the sound of that champagne popping in the kitchen while I walked out into the freezing winter night with a duffel bag. I thought about my father telling me I was a waste of space. "Sterling," I said, turning back to face him, my voice as steady and cold as the ocean in winter. "Draw up the formal affidavits immediately. Contact the regional bank's primary fraud department and alert the local authorities. I want to press full criminal charges. Burn their entire empire to the ground." I thought the worst was over. I thought exposing the fraud would be the neat, tidy end of my nightmare. I was so incredibly wrong. The real war was just beginning, and my family had absolutely no idea the level of calculated hell I was about to unleash upon them. The wheels of the federal justice system, especially when they are meticulously greased by a high-powered, incredibly expensive corporate lawyer like Sterling, move with a terrifying and absolute efficiency. Less than 48 hours after I sat in that polished oak conference room and handed over the forged commercial loan documents, the regional bank's primary fraud department executed a hard, unforgiving, and complete lockdown on Julian's entire financial existence. They didn't just call in the massive $200,000 loan. That would have been standard procedure. Instead, they triggered a massive, cascading default across every single financial account associated with Julian Enterprises, his personal checking accounts, and his linked credit lines. Because my father, in his infinite arrogance and blind faith in his golden child, had foolishly co-signed on several of Julian's earlier, smaller credit lines to help him keep up his wealthy appearances on social media, the bank immediately extended their reach. They placed comprehensive, devastating liens on my parents' remaining liquid assets to secure the outstanding debt. Simultaneously, the federal authorities were formally notified of the aggravated identity theft and the commercial wire fraud. Julian wasn't just a failed entrepreneur who ran out of money anymore. He was an active target of a rigorous, multi-agency federal criminal investigation. My personal cell phone, which had been relatively quiet for weeks as I built my empire in silence, suddenly exploded into a relentless, chaotic symphony of absolute panic. Voicemails began to pile up by the hour, filling my inbox to maximum capacity. The first few were from my mother. Her voice was unrecognizable. She was sobbing uncontrollably into the receiver, her words slurring together in a desperate, frantic pitch. Arthur, please pick up the phone. Sweetheart, please. The bank just froze our primary checking account. Your father's retirement distribution was blocked. They are saying Julian committed a crime, Arthur. They are saying he stole your identity. There has to be a terrible misunderstanding. Please call the bank and tell them it's a mistake. We are family, Arthur. Please, I am begging you on my hands and knees, don't do this to us. Then came the messages from my father. He didn't cry. He raged. Listen to me, you ungrateful little bastard. His voice boomed through the speaker, vibrating with a desperate, impotent fury. You call off your legal hounds right this second. You do not drag this family's name through the mud over a piece of paper. A lawsuit of this magnitude will ruin our reputation in the community forever. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us? By trying to send your own flesh and blood to federal prison? Call your lawyer and drop the charges immediately. Or so help me God. I will make you regret the day you were born. Even Aunt Clara, the woman who had spent years calling me just to mock my warehouse job and brag about Julian's imaginary success, decided to leave a nervous, trembling voicemail. Arthur, dear, it's Aunt Clara. I heard about the unpleasantness with the bank. Listen, darling, we need to resolve this quietly, like a proper, respectable family. We can't have a public criminal trial. It would be entirely too humiliating for all of us. Just tell the authorities you gave Julian verbal permission. We can work out a payment plan for the money. Be the bigger person here, Arthur. I didn't listen to their pleas. I didn't return a single text message. I didn't engage with their gaslighting or their sudden, entirely fabricated affection. I simply downloaded every single voicemail, converted them into audio files, and forwarded them directly to Sterling to add to our rapidly growing mountain of legal evidence. I had spent 25 years of my life shrinking my own existence to make them comfortable. I had spent decades acting as the shock absorber for their toxic dysfunction. I was completely done playing that role. Instead of engaging in their chaotic downward spiral, I completely immersed myself in the explosive, undeniable growth of my software company. We officially finalized the multimillion-dollar acquisition of the commercial server farm, securing our digital infrastructure for the next decade. Because of her relentless dedication, her brilliant coding architecture, and the sheer loyalty she showed me during our crucial expansion phase, I called Sarah into my office. I didn't just give her a bonus. I handed her a massive promotion, elevating her to the position of Chief Technology Officer. I gave her an equity stake in the company and a salary that would ensure she and her future children would never have to worry about money again. It felt incredibly profound to reward true loyalty, especially when I knew exactly what the darkest depths of betrayal felt like. With the business running flawlessly like a well-oiled machine, I finally turned my attention to my personal sanctuary. I had been living in a modest, barren downtown apartment for years, hoarding cash, living below my means, and investing aggressively in diverse real estate portfolios. It was finally time to build a home, not just a house with 4 walls, but a fortress of my own making. A physical representation of my survival. Through a highly discreet, exclusive private broker who specialized in celebrity properties, I found a breathtaking beachfront villa situated in a highly exclusive, heavily guarded, gated coastal community. It was an absolute masterpiece of modern architecture. It featured sweeping, floor-to-ceiling tempered glass windows that let in the natural light, imported dark mahogany floors, a custom chef's kitchen, and a massive private balcony that overlooked the endless, crashing waves of the Pacific Ocean. I bought the property entirely in cash. I meticulously shielded the deed and the property taxes behind a newly formed, anonymous holding company to ensure my toxic family couldn't easily track my physical location through public county records. Moving into that villa was the most surreal, deeply emotional experience of my entire life. The first night I spent there, the furniture hadn't even arrived yet. I walked barefoot through the massive, echoing rooms. I opened the sliding glass doors and listened to the rhythmic, calming sound of the waves crashing against the shoreline. I closed my eyes and vividly remembered the freezing, agonizing nights I had spent huddled under a cheap, thin winter coat in the driver's seat of my broken-down Honda Civic in that Walmart parking lot, terrified of the world, terrified of the police tapping on my window. And now I owned a pristine piece of the coastline. I had built a massive empire from the absolute scraps they had thrown at me. I was untouchable. Or at least I thought I was untouchable. You see, true pathological narcissists never actually believe they are defeated until the absolute final nail is aggressively hammered into their coffin. My family, completely blinded by decades of unchecked entitlement and their delusional, unwavering belief in Julian's inherent superiority, somehow convinced themselves that they could still manipulate the situation. They truly believed that if they could just get to me physically, if they could just corner me and play the ultimate victim card in person, I would fold under the pressure. Because that's what the old Arthur had always done in the past. They didn't realize that version of me was dead and buried. 6 months after the federal fraud investigation officially began, the legal and financial pressure on Julian and my parents had reached a terrifying boiling point. The authorities were closing in, issuing subpoenas and seizing hard drives. The commercial creditors were aggressively circling their home like vultures waiting for an animal to die. The false, wealthy reality they had projected to the world for years was crumbling into fine dust. They were utterly, completely desperate, and desperation makes toxic people incredibly bold. It was a beautiful, clear Tuesday morning. I was standing on my mahogany balcony, holding a heavy ceramic mug of black coffee, enjoying the crisp, salty ocean breeze. Down below, the private, palm tree-lined road of my gated community was dead quiet. Then, the aggressive, unmistakable, guttural roar of a high-performance engine shattered the morning peace. A sleek, black Porsche Macan, The exact same car my father had purchased for Julian using his retirement funds to maintain his fake CEO image, swerved erratically around the bend. I knew for a definitive fact that the regional bank had issued a formal repossession order for that specific vehicle 3 weeks ago. This meant Julian was actively hiding the car from the repo men, driving it illegally, risking further criminal charges just to cling to the last pathetic shred of his wealthy facade. The Porsche slammed its brakes violently right outside my heavy, wrought iron security gates. The expensive tires squealed loudly against the hot asphalt, leaving long, dark rubber skid marks on the pristine street. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I didn't feel the old, familiar knot of suffocating anxiety that used to paralyze me whenever my family was angry. I just took a slow, deliberate sip of my dark coffee and watched the pathetic, desperate scene unfold from my high vantage point. The driver's side door flung open. Out stumbled Julian. He looked like a haunted, decaying ghost of the arrogant golden child he used to be. His expensive designer clothes were visibly wrinkled, stained with what looked like coffee and sweat. His hair, usually styled to absolute perfection, was a greasy, unkempt mess. His face was heavily bloated. His eyes ringed with dark, purple shadows from what I could only assume were endless sleepless nights and heavy drinking. He looked frantic, his eyes darting around the wealthy neighborhood with a sickening mixture of awe and deep, simmering rage. The passenger door opened a second later, and my mother, Eleanor, hurried out onto the pavement. She looked 15 years older than the last time I had seen her at that miserable Thanksgiving dinner. She was wearing a faded, outdated cardigan over a wrinkled blouse, her shoulders heavily slumped with the exhausting, crushing weight of keeping up appearances while her world burned. She reached out with trembling, frail hands, grabbing Julian's arm, trying to urgently whisper something into his ear, likely begging him not to make a loud scene in such an affluent, closely monitored area. But Julian aggressively, violently yanked his arm away from her frail grip. He stormed toward the heavy iron bars of my security gate like a cornered animal. He grabbed the dark metal with both hands, shaking the gate in a futile, pathetic display of physical anger. He stared intensely through the bars, taking in the meticulously manicured courtyard, the custom stone water fountain bubbling peacefully, the massive architectural pillars, and the sheer, undeniable magnitude of the incredible wealth I had built entirely without them. Then, he tilted his head back, his bloodshot eyes scanning the massive glass facade of the villa, until he finally spotted me. I was standing perfectly still on the second-story balcony, looking down at him with absolute, unwavering, freezing indifference. The stage was finally set. The precious golden child had finally arrived at the heavily guarded gates of the sun they threw away like trash. And he was completely, utterly unprepared for the brutal reality check that was about to hit him like a runaway freight train. For a long, incredibly heavy moment, Julian and I just stared at each other across the distance. The silence between us was thicker and more suffocating than the humid morning ocean air. He gripped the iron bars of my security gate so tightly his knuckles turned completely stark white, trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and raw, unfiltered fury. My mother stood a few steps behind him on the hot asphalt, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a profound mixture of shock at the sheer size and luxury of my home, and absolute, paralyzing terror at what was about to happen. Then, the passenger side window of the illegally driven Porsche rolled down, and the engine was finally cut off. My father, Richard, stepped out of the vehicle. He didn't have his usual commanding, arrogant posture. He didn't look like the man who had laughed at me while I packed a duffel bag. He looked entirely defeated. His suit was cheap and hung loosely on his shrinking frame. His face was deeply lined with unimaginable stress. But even in total, undeniable defeat, his sheer, baseline arrogance remained entirely intact. He walked slowly up to the gate, stood right next to Julian, and looked up at me on the balcony. "Arthur," my father called out, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet, empty street. He desperately tried to inject his old, authoritative, commanding tone into the words, but it fell completely, pathetically flat. "Open the gate right now. We need to come inside. We need to sit down and talk to you. Face to face. Man to man. As a family. I didn't move a single inch. I rested my forearms on the mahogany railing. We have absolutely nothing to talk about, Richard. If you have a statement to make, you can speak directly to Sterling. He handles all of my legal correspondence regarding the massive federal fraud your golden son committed against my corporation. My mother stepped forward, pushing past my father, tears instantly streaming down her pale, wrinkled cheeks. She was desperately playing her absolute favorite, most practiced role. The heartbroken, innocent, well-meaning matriarch. Arthur, please, sweetheart, please don't do this to us. You are destroying this family. Your brother made a mistake. A foolish, desperate, youthful mistake. He was just trying to keep his business afloat. He was trying to make us proud. You have so much now, Arthur. Just look at this incredible place. You have millions. Why are you maliciously punishing your own blood for a single, stupid mistake? A mistake is forgetting to pay a utility bill or running a red light, Eleanor, I replied, my voice projecting clearly and coldly down to the street, cutting through her theatrical sobbing. Forging my signature on a federal commercial loan document, stealing my corporate tax IDs, and attempting to saddle my company with $200,000 of criminal debt is not a mistake. It is a highly calculated, deliberate, malicious felony. Julian finally found his voice. It wasn't the smooth, confident, polished voice of the luxury brand CEO he pretended to be in his social media videos. It was the desperate, whiny, high-pitched voice of a spoiled, entitled child who had finally, for the first time in his entire life, been told no. I was going to pay it back, Julian screamed, his voice cracking violently with emotion. I swear to God, Arthur. I was going to pay the entire loan back before you even noticed the paperwork. Marcus promised me a massive, guaranteed return on a private crypto investment. I just needed the bridge capital for 30 days. You wouldn't give me the money when I asked you at Thanksgiving, so I had to find another way. You forced my hand. This is your fault for being so incredibly greedy. I actually laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a cold, hollow, deeply cynical sound that seemed to physically startle all three of them. You are actively blaming me for your own federal crimes because I refused to blindly fund your delusions? Because I refused to hand over the money I earned while I was sleeping in a car? That is truly magnificent, twisted logic, Julian. You belong in a psychology textbook. My father held up a trembling hand, trying to silence my brother before he confessed to anything else on a public street. Arthur, listen to reason, my dad pleaded, gripping the iron bars next to Julian. The criminal investigation is moving entirely too fast. The feds are pulling our bank records today. If you just pick up the phone, call the bank, and tell the federal authorities you gave Julian verbal permission to use your name as a corporate sponsor, they will immediately drop the wire fraud charges. We can settle the debt privately. You clearly have the liquid capital to make this go away. Just pay off the $200,000 balance to the bank, drop the civil lawsuit, and we can all move on from this horrible nightmare. I stared down at the man who had looked me in the eye and told me I was a waste of space. He was literally openly asking me to commit federal perjury, to lie to federal investigators, and to liquidate my own hard-earned corporate assets to pay off his golden child's massive criminal debt, all just to save their precious, completely fabricated reputation in the suburbs. I wouldn't cross the street to spit on you if you were on fire, I said softly, but the words carried down to them like physical gunshots. I am not dropping the charges. I am not calling the bank. Julian is going to face the full, unmitigated, devastating consequences of his actions. Every single one of them. And if you co-signed anything for him, so will you. Julian slammed his forehead against the cold iron gate. I lost everything, he wailed, his entire facade completely and utterly shattering. The business is dead. My accounts are totally frozen. The landlord locked me out of my commercial space downtown yesterday. They seized my entire inventory. I have nothing left. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, bloodshot, and wild with a desperate, agonizing, pathetic hope. Arthur, please. I am begging you. Just help me start over. I have a brand new business model. A new, reliable supplier in Europe. If you won't drop the federal charges, at least help me secure a new physical location to generate revenue. I just need you to co-sign a new lease for the exact same commercial space downtown. The landlord kicked me out for non-payment, but if you step in as the primary corporate guarantor with your flawless credit, they'll let me back into the building. I can rebuild the brand. I can pay off the debt. I can fix this whole mess. I slowly placed my coffee mug on the thick mahogany railing of the balcony. I looked down at Julian. I looked at his desperate, pleading eyes. I looked at my parents, holding their breath, praying that my innate, childhood desire for their approval would finally kick in and save them. And then, I delivered the absolute, crushing psychological blow that I had been meticulously, quietly setting up for months. You want to lease your old commercial space downtown? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet, conversational tone. The massive, expensive corner unit on Fifth Avenue with the floor-to-ceiling display windows? Yes, Julian practically sobbed, nodding frantically, a sickening smile of hope breaking across his tear-stained face. Yes, exactly. It's the perfect, premium location. The foot traffic is absolutely incredible. If you just sign the corporate guarantee document today, the landlord will hand over the keys tomorrow morning. Please, Arthur. It's literally all I have left in the world. I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the terrifying, cold smile of an apex predator that had finally, effortlessly trapped its prey in a corner with no exit. That is going to be a massive, insurmountable problem, Julian, I said smoothly, leaning forward over the railing. Why? Julian asked, his face paling instantly, sensing the invisible trap rapidly closing around his throat. Why is it a problem? Your credit score is flawless. Your software company is worth millions. The landlord would practically beg to have you on the lease. Because, I replied, locking my eyes entirely on his, making sure he heard every single syllable of my next sentence. I bought that entire commercial building 3 weeks ago. My holding company is the new legal landlord of that property. And I have an incredibly strict, non-negotiable corporate policy against leasing my premium real estate to convicted felons who commit commercial bank fraud. The silence that followed was absolute. It was profound. It was the deafening sound of a completely fabricated, delusional reality instantly shattering into a million irreparable, jagged pieces. My mother gasped violently, stumbling backward and pressing her hand violently against her chest as if she had been physically shot by a sniper. My father's jaw literally dropped, his eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated horror as the full, terrifying magnitude of my financial power finally dawned on his arrogant mind. I wasn't just wealthy. I wasn't just doing well for myself. I actively owned the very ground they were desperately trying to stand on. I owned their reality. Julian's brain completely short-circuited. He couldn't process the overwhelming influx of information. He looked at the massive, sprawling villa behind me. He looked at my calm, completely unbothered face. And he looked at the stark, undeniable, horrific reality of his own pathetic existence. His legs completely gave out beneath him. He collapsed onto his knees on the hot, unforgiving asphalt, his hands sliding weakly down the iron bars of the gate, leaving streaks of sweat on the metal. He slammed his fists against the pavement, completely ignoring my mother as she dropped to her knees in the dirt beside him, trying desperately to pull him up. Julian threw his head back toward the sky, his vocal cords tearing, and unleashed a scream of pure, unfiltered, agonizing jealousy that echoed down the entire pristine coastline. Why does he get everything? Julian screamed, his voice breaking into a guttural sob. Mom, tell me. It was supposed to be me. It was supposed to be my life. Why him? Why does he get to win? Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Now, let's watch the final, rotting pillars of their empire completely collapse into dust. The total psychological breakdown at my security gates was just the opening act of their absolute, undeniable destruction. I didn't stay on the balcony to watch them cry. I didn't gloat. I simply turned around, walked back into my beautiful, quiet, air-conditioned house, and locked the heavy glass doors behind me. 10 minutes later, my private security team arrived in a patrol vehicle, calmly but firmly threatening to call the local police and press trespassing charges if they didn't vacate the private road immediately. My parents, terrified of further legal trouble, shoved a still sobbing, hyperventilating Julian into the illegally driven Porsche and sped away, leaving nothing but dark rubber skid marks on the asphalt as a permanent reminder of their pathetic, final visit. 2 days later, karma finally caught up to the stolen car. Julian had been frantically parking the Porsche Macan behind a local, run-down grocery store a few miles from my parents' house, foolishly trying to keep it out of sight from the street. But the bank's repo men weren't amateurs. They had been tracking the vehicle's internal GPS system for weeks, waiting for it to stay stationary long enough to strike. In the middle of broad daylight, while Julian was inside buying cheap liquor, a heavy-duty tow truck backed up, hooked the luxury vehicle, and began dragging it away. Julian ran out of the store and actually tried to physically fight the massive tow truck driver. This incredibly stupid decision resulted in the police being called, and Julian was subjected to a very public, very humiliating arrest for simple assault and disturbing the peace, adding another brilliant, totally avoidable layer to his rapidly mounting federal legal troubles. But the true, devastating, earth-shattering collapse happened to my parents. When my father proudly handed Julian that initial $1 million cashier's check 5 years ago, he had completely, recklessly remortgaged the massive suburban house I grew up in. When Julian's fraudulent luxury business started failing shortly after, my parents had panicked. Instead of cutting their losses, they had taken out aggressive, high-interest second mortgages and predatory personal loans to secretly cover his mounting vendor debts. Entirely convinced by Julian's lies that his brand was just one viral marketing moment away from massive profitability. When the regional bank finally called in the fraudulent $200,000 loan, and the feds froze all associated accounts, the financial dominoes fell with terrifying, unstoppable speed. My parents defaulted on absolutely everything. The massive, beautiful suburban home that had been the ultimate symbol of their arrogant status. The very house they had violently, callously kicked me out of so Julian could have a home office, was officially seized by the primary mortgage lender. They were facing imminent, devastating foreclosure. To avoid the absolute, unbearable shame of a public bank auction where all their wealthy neighbors would watch them lose everything, they desperately listed the house on the open real estate market for a massive, fire sale discount. They were praying for a quick, anonymous cash buyer to swoop in and save them from total, unrecoverable bankruptcy. They got their quick cash buyer. They just had absolutely no idea who it was. The moment the house hit the MLS listings, I contacted Ms. Vance, a brilliant, highly discreet, and ruthless real estate broker who frequently handled high-net-worth commercial acquisitions for my various holding companies. I instructed her to submit a full cash offer on my parents' house immediately, perfectly matching their desperate asking price so they wouldn't hesitate, but to bury the purchase entirely under a newly formed, deeply layered LLC based out of Delaware. My parents, absolutely desperate for the financial lifeline and terrified of the bank, signed the closing documents in record time without ever once questioning the faceless corporate entity buying their home. The day after the legal deed was officially recorded in my holding company's name, and the funds cleared escrow, I drove to the old neighborhood. I parked my sleek, understated sedan across the street and just sat there for a moment, looking at the house. The pristine, arrogant facade I remembered from my childhood was completely gone. The expensive white paint was heavily peeling off the wooden siding. The once meticulously manicured lawn, which my father used to obsess over, was overgrown with thick, ugly weeds and dead patches of grass. The gutters were overflowing with rotting leaves. It smelled of dust, neglect, and profound failure. It didn't look like a throne anymore. It looked like a decaying, forgotten tomb. I stepped out of my car, walked up the cracked concrete driveway, the exact same driveway I had stood on in the freezing cold with my duffel bag, and knocked heavily 3 times on the front door. My mother opened it. She was wearing stained sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, holding a half-empty cardboard packing box. When she saw me standing on the porch in a tailored suit, she completely froze. The remaining color drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking like a ghost. "Arthur?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of deep confusion and sudden, terrifying fear. What are you doing here? Did you come to help us pack? Have you changed your mind about the charges?" I didn't answer her. I didn't ask for permission to enter. I simply stepped forward, forcing her to step back, and walked past her into the main hallway. The inside of the house was in total chaotic disarray. Cardboard boxes were stacked haphazardly everywhere, filled with the useless, expensive junk they had accumulated over a lifetime of pretending to be better than everyone else. In the living room, my father was sitting heavily in his favorite leather armchair, staring blankly at the wall, looking completely hollowed out and defeated. And sitting across from him on the sofa, clutching her expensive designer handbag like a shield, was Aunt Clara. Well, Aunt Clara sneered as I walked into the room, though her voice noticeably lacked its usual confident venom. "Look who decided to show up to the funeral of his own family's legacy. Come to gloat, Arthur? It's incredibly funny you mention a funeral, Clara," I said, my voice cutting through the dusty, tense air like a razor blade. I stood in the center of the room, looking down at all of them. "Because your financial life is about to be buried right next to theirs." Clara blinked rapidly, her face tightening with sudden apprehension. "Excuse me? What on earth are you talking about?" I reached inside my tailored jacket and pulled out a thick, pristine manila folder. While my legal team and forensic accountants were aggressively auditing Julian's fraudulent business accounts to prepare for the federal trial, we found a very interesting, deeply hidden paper trail. Julian wasn't just losing money on overpriced luxury candles and terrible marketing campaigns. He was heavily, hopelessly addicted to high-stakes crypto gambling with his shady business partner, Marcus. And do you want to know the most fascinating part? Do you want to know who was secretly funding that gambling addiction? Charging him illegal, loan shark interest rates entirely behind my parents' backs. My father slowly turned his head, looking up from his armchair. He stared at Clara, his eyes narrowing. I looked directly at my aunt, watching the sheer, unadulterated panic finally ignite in her wide eyes. "You bled them completely dry, Clara. You knew Julian's business was a sinking ship from day one, and you actively exploited his gambling addiction to drain my parents' remaining retirement funds into your own offshore pockets. You are the reason they had to take out those second mortgages. I've already forwarded the entire, documented paper trail to your husband's incredibly aggressive divorce attorney. I imagine fighting over custody of your hidden, illegal assets is going to be incredibly difficult when the IRS gets involved in the audit." Clara stood up so fast she knocked over her teacup. Her mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish, but she couldn't form a single word of defense. The evidence was irrefutable. She just grabbed her expensive coat and practically sprinted out the front door, her toxic, manipulative reign of terror over our family completely, permanently shattered. I turned my attention back to my parents. The silence in the room was deafening. I opened the manila folder and pulled out a single, legally binding document with a bright red seal at the top. I dropped it onto the glass coffee table right in front of my father. "What is this?" my father asked, his voice barely a raspy whisper, his hands shaking too much to even touch the paper. "That is a formal, legally binding, 30-day eviction notice," I said coldly, looking him dead in the eye. "The faceless, out-of-state LLC that bought this house for cash last week? I own it. I am the sole shareholder. I own this house, Richard. I own every single floorboard, every broken window, and the exact spot where you stood when you told me I was a waste of space. My mother let out a horrific, guttural sob, her legs giving out as she collapsed onto the floor next to a stack of boxes, burying her face in her hands. "You have exactly 30 days to remove yourselves, your belongings, and your felon son from my private property," I told them, my voice completely devoid of any anger, sadness, or emotion. "If you leave a single piece of trash behind, if you damage the walls on your way out, I will personally sue you for the cleanup and repair costs. Have a great life." I turned around and walked out the front door, stepping out into the bright sunlight, leaving them to drown in the absolute, suffocating silence of their own making. They moved out of the house exactly 28 days later, 2 days before the sheriff's deputies would have arrived to physically remove them from the premises. I didn't go back to the property to supervise the move. I didn't care what they took or where they went, though I eventually heard the grim details through the rapidly dwindling, highly gossipy family grapevine. My parents and Julian were forced to rent a cramped, poorly insulated 2-bedroom apartment in a highly undesirable, high-crime neighborhood on the far, industrial outskirts of the city. My father, the man who used to boast loudly at country club dinners about his massive inheritance and his brilliant stock market investments, was forced to swallow his immense pride and take a humiliating, physically exhausting minimum wage job as a greeter at a local big-box hardware store just to keep the electricity on and buy groceries. Julian's fate was even worse. Completely stripped of his leased Porsche, his fake luxury CEO title, and his lifelong status as the untouchable golden child, he was entirely exposed to the harsh reality of the justice system. Facing years of complex, aggressive federal legal battles for wire fraud and identity theft, he was totally reliant on a heavily overworked, underpaid public defender because my parents couldn't afford to hire a real criminal defense lawyer. He was looking at a minimum of 5 to 7 years in federal prison, and there was absolutely no one left to write a check to save him. As for the house, I never spent a single night sleeping in it. The energy inside those walls was far too dark, too toxic, too heavily saturated with decades of psychological manipulation, conditional love, and blatant favoritism. It wasn't a home. It was a monument to everything I had survived. Instead of moving in, I hired a massive, highly rated professional contracting crew. I gave them strict instructions to completely gut the interior of the house down to the bare wooden studs. We tore out the dining room where they had popped champagne while I was homeless. We demolished the living room where my father had handed Julian the $1 million check. We upgraded every single appliance, ripped out the old carpets, installed hardwood floors, and repainted the peeling exterior a bright, modern color. Once the grueling renovation was complete, the house looked brand new, entirely unrecognizable from the arrogant, decaying tomb my parents had created. The very next day, I immediately put the property back on the aggressive real estate market. Because of the extensive modern upgrades and the highly desirable suburban school district, it sold in less than a week, triggering a massive, aggressive bidding war between multiple young families that resulted in a staggering, 6-figure profit over what I had originally paid to bail my parents out. But I didn't keep a single penny of that profit. I didn't need it. My software company had recently finalized our massive expansion into the European enterprise market, and my personal wealth was compounding entirely on its own, generating more passive income in a month than my father had made in a decade. Instead, I took the entire massive sum of profit from the sale of my childhood home, consulted with my legal team, and quietly established a comprehensive, fully funded nonprofit organization. We created a massive college fund and a dedicated mentorship program specifically targeted at underprivileged, homeless youth in my city. I meticulously designed the charity's charter to identify and help kids who had been violently thrown away by their own toxic families. Kids who were currently sleeping in freezing cars in dark Walmart parking lots, staring at the stained fabric of the roof, and wondering if their lives had any real value or meaning. I wanted to make absolutely, definitively sure that no kid in this city ever had to feel the crushing, agonizing, paralyzing loneliness that I felt the night my parents chose their golden child's ridiculous fantasy over my basic human survival. Taking the money generated from the very house I was kicked out of, and using it to put roofs over the heads of abandoned teenagers, was the ultimate poetic closure to the darkest chapter of my life. The day the charity's legal paperwork was officially finalized and the funds were securely transferred into the trust, I left my downtown office early. I got into my car, rolled down the windows, and drove out to the winding, scenic coastal highway. I drove for an hour, listening to the engine hum, until I found a high, secluded overlook that jutted out over the cliffs. I pulled my car over, turned off the engine, and stepped out into the warm, late afternoon sun. I walked up to the edge, leaned against the heavy metal safety railing, and looked out at the vast, endless, glittering expanse of the blue Pacific Ocean. For 5 long years, a dark, incredibly heavy knot of burning anger and desperate, clawing resentment had lived deep inside my chest. It had been my constant companion. It was the volatile fuel that had kept me awake, writing code during those freezing nights in my Honda Civic. It was the relentless engine that drove me to aggressively build my company, to hoard wealth out of sheer terror of being poor again, to construct intricate legal traps, and to meticulously plan my ultimate, devastating revenge against the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I had spent half a decade desperately, obsessively wanting them to feel exactly how they made me feel, worthless, homeless, and entirely defeated. But standing there on that cliff, feeling the warm, gentle ocean wind on my face, I closed my eyes and realized something incredibly profound. The knot was completely gone. The burning, consuming anger had quietly evaporated into the sea air, replaced by a deep, unshakable, absolute silence in my soul. I didn't hate my parents anymore. I didn't hate Julian. Hate required massive amounts of energy. Hate required a lingering emotional attachment that I simply no longer possessed. I felt absolutely nothing for them. Looking back, they weren't powerful monsters. They were just pathetic, deeply flawed strangers who happened to share my DNA. They were strangers who made a horrific, arrogant bet on the wrong horse and lost absolutely everything they valued in the process. I had completely severed the toxic, manipulative chains of my past. Not just legally, not just financially, but emotionally. I was finally truly free. I took a deep, cleansing breath, filling my lungs with the crisp, salty air. I opened my eyes, walked back to my car, started the quiet engine, and drove back toward my beachfront villa. I had a massive, thriving company to run, incredibly loyal employees to protect and mentor, and a beautiful, peaceful life to live entirely on my own terms. I never looked back in my rearview mirror again. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my journey today. If there is one crucial, life-saving lesson I want you to take away from my story, it is this. Family is absolutely not defined by the blood in your veins or the name on your birth certificate. It is defined by basic, fundamental respect, unwavering loyalty, and the people who consciously choose to stand by your side when you have absolutely nothing left to offer them but your presence. Do not ever let toxic people use the word family as a weapon to manipulate your boundaries, drain your financial resources, or make you feel small. You have the absolute right to walk away. You have the right to protect your peace at all costs. And remember, your ultimate success, built quietly, honestly, and with integrity, will always be the loudest, most devastating response to those who tried to destroy you. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to establish a hard, unforgiving boundary with someone you loved to protect your own sanity or your financial future? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.